Hey everybody, welcome back to the Failed Contraception Racing channel. We're back on the LS swap for the Crown Vic today and doing a little work on the oil pan. We need to get some oil control integrated into this thing so we're not blowing it up after 10 laps. So right now, you can see I've got it up in the air, got the oil pan off, and give you a preview here of what the plan is. Got the pan kind of cleaned up, and thankfully there wasn't any metal shavings or anything like that in the bottom. It had some sediment in these deep sections where you would expect them to be, down in the corners and the lowest ends, where the more solid items are going to settle. But none of it was, shiny. It was just, I don't think it got really regular oil changes. So thankfully it's fairly low miles. But anyway, in the sump area here, I bought basically a do-it-yourself baffle kit. So these are the plates that are gonna sit in here vertically. And I'm guessing, it's just barely gonna fit. I can trim that down too if I need to, but we're gonna basically create a box with these, and a four-sided box. And then there's these little rubber flapper doors that go into these grooves, and as you go around corners and create G-forces, oil from the outside is going to push those flaps open to get into the sump area and get to the oil pickup. That way we don't run the pickup dry and run the engine dry as we're going around corners with heavy G's. That's one part of the solution. Another part is this cheap aluminum screen. May or may not make sense. But we're gonna take this stuff, okay? We're gonna roll it out flat, cut it to size, and then that is going to sandwich in here in this little bit of clearance we have between the crank and the windage tray, the factory windage tray. Why, you ask? Well, this is actually an idea I kind of stole from the place where I got my crank scraper from. They offer an option for a windage tray and a piece of screen like that for like $250, which I just couldn't see spending when I can buy the screen for about 15 bucks. And so I just, like I said, I couldn't justify spending that much money on something when I could buy the materials so cheap and pretty much make my own. But it is, as you can see, the clearance is pretty tight there. So the crank scraper, I've got to take the windage tray off, and then up underneath here, I'll have to look again, I can't remember which side. One of these sides, the crank scraper will mount here and basically scrape the oil off the crankshaft as it spins by. And that will help get oil down to the windage tray. The screen is going to help the oil, or catch the oil, so that can drip down instead of the oil hitting the windage tray and bouncing back up. And so basically it'll hit the screen, drain onto the windage tray, and then that'll drain down into the pan. And then the baffling system in the sump will keep the pickup submerged in oil, and everything will be happy, and we'll make it a race without blowing something up. Yeah, that's the wishful thinking. So, I'm gonna get started on that and see how much trimming and cutting I need to do to get those to fit properly. And I will have to, you can see the bottom of the pan is not flat, and these, I may have to come up with something here because these need to sit down and sit flat against the floor. So it could be tricky on the two going that direction. We'll see what happens, and we'll be back in a little bit. All right, guys, progress update. The aluminum mesh for the windage tray. This was the first piece, and that just started really turning into a epic failure. It just wasn't fitting right, and I should have taken more time fitting it to the windage tray itself. And grab that here. So there's the windage tray. These or this will sit on top of it, okay, and catch the oil. Oil will then come down and drain into the pan through there. This one was just a lot of poor fitment issues, and I was having spots where the crankshaft was touching. I'm still actually getting some spots where the crank is touching on this one. Let's see if we can see that out here. Wow, that's bright. Let's see here. So you can see like right there, see how that's getting scraped, and there. So there's a few of those spots on here. I could probably just leave it and let it wear through. Being at this is aluminum, I probably turned the engine over, I don't know, 15 times, and it ground through that far already. So I mean, the engine could sit and idle for about a minute and probably clearance itself, no problem. Since this is aluminum, it's really soft. But I'm gonna try to keep as much of that intact as possible. I'm gonna see if I can see any of the spots where the crank, I'm almost positive it was this front one up here and a couple of these in the back. The other issue, I know more issue is weird, right? Is in the pan here, the size of these baffle plates in comparison to the size of my sump. When we look at this, part of my problem is that these round holes right there, that is the side that needs to be down in the bottom of the pan sump. There's a lot more space up above, so I can't flip these over. Otherwise, you're not going to get any oil into the sump area, and your oil pickup's going to be starving all the time. And there really isn't much room on the bottom of that hole to clearance or cut space out. But my biggest issue is length. You know, looking at the distance from here to here, this is all flat, but that front hole hangs over the edge. On top of that, we put on the back side of the sump, you know, that's not bad there, but yeah, it doesn't really give us much room for the front to back plates. So I think my only option is going to be figuring out some way to extend this on the bottom maybe, and then, yeah, I'm not sure yet. Actually, I think what I was doing some measuring earlier, I can take a 1/2 inch out of the center here. So if I cut this, take a 1/2 inch out of the center, and then join it back together, whether I JB weld it or, you know, have someone weld it. It's aluminum, so I can't really use the welder I've got here. That would bring this distance closer to where I need it. I would still have a little bit of this hole kind of on this downward curve, but I'd be able to fill that in probably. So yeah, there's some complication. The little outline you see here is basically where the pickup sits in the pan. So this just kind of hangs out like that in here. So that is the area I need to get these baffles around, which is going to be easier said than done, usually, obviously. And just an interesting tidbit, not anything really important, but I know I've wondered about this myself. This is a truck pan, and on the bottom of these truck pans, there is this goofy plate. I had no idea what it was for. I've asked on forums before, and the consensus seemed to be some sort of like reinforcement plate. I do remember someone saying it's a potentially for sound deadening, which I'm thinking more and more is the case, because when you hear this thing hit the ground, it does not clang or make any metallic sounds at all. It's got this black backing on it. And it almost looks like, yeah, there's 2 layers there. So there's some sort of sound deadening material on there, which now makes me believe that's exactly what this is for. So just interesting. But anyway, so yeah, now I've got another issue to overcome here on this oil pan thing and figure out how to get that to work. So there's going to be some cutting and modifying, and yeah, and all in the name of because race car. So I will get back with you guys when we make some more headway on this. All right, thanks. Hey everyone, just one more thing quick here. Just wanted to show you that windage tray, that screen in place. Turn this here so we can actually see. Okay, if you can see clearance there. You can actually see one of the counterweights of the crank up front. That's one of the ones that was hitting. Let's go around front here. So right in that corner is where it was hitting. And that's where the other ones were hitting too, was up in the corners here. So all I did was take off the windage tray, lay this screen in it, and just give it a few taps with the round side of a ball peen hammer to give that clearance for the crank to move through there. And before I could very clearly hear movement or interference, and now there's none. It turns around freely, no scraping, just the sound of things moving around in there like they're supposed to, oil trying to pump, that sort of thing. So that is actually good to go. I think I'm happy with that. I'm gonna go and trim off the ends here, and then we can worry about the next issue with the pan baffle, which should be interesting. So I think I'll stop this one here, and when we get back to this, I'll start up a new video. Thanks everyone. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Failed Contraception Racing channel. Today I just wanted to go over some of the things that we're doing to the engine in terms of oil control. Being that we use the car exclusively for endurance road racing, your standard oil pan with the big sump just isn't going to cut it for what we need. So we need to go beyond that and really introduce some elements that will help keep that oil covering the oil pickup in the sump of the oil pan. So one of the first things I've got here is, this is a crank scraper. This is from crankscrapers.com, or I think it's Aisha Johnson is the name of the guy or the company. But he basically, from the looks of this, he custom cuts each one of these per order. These do not look like they are mass-produced, laser cut or water cut type deals. This looks like it's a hand-cut job. But it's profiled for the engine and crankshaft. And I don't know if you can see from there, but if we move up, each one of these edges, they're all knife edged. So this is going to lay on top of the crankshaft, and as the crank moves through there, it's going to just barely miss these edges. So essentially what happens is, as the crankshaft passes through here, as you can see, we're almost touching, but not quite. So what's going to happen is, as this passes through, as it's spinning, it's going to scrape that oil off of the crank. So it's going to give us multiple benefits. Number one, it's going to get the oil off the crank, so we're going to help reduce parasitic loss. So that's, maybe it's a half a horsepower, whatever it is. It's a horsepower bonus, so you can't be mad at that. Number two is the oil control. It's going to keep the oil off of there, and it's going to scrape it off so it can flow down onto the windage tray, which introduces us to our next step. Your typical windage tray is just this guy right here, okay? And I've got it backwards, which would typically just sit like this, and oil would just drip down. Now keep in mind, the engine's upside down right now, so this is actually the bottom of the engine. Oil would drip down onto the top of the windage tray and would seep through these crevices down into the oil pan. one of the issues with this setup is that when you've got a crankshaft spinning at 4, 5, 6,000 RPM, that oil is whipping off there and it's hitting the bottom of the windage tray and bouncing back up into the crankshaft. Okay, so it's not doing as much as it could. So this is an idea I stole from the same place I brought the crank scraper from. They sell a kit, which is the windage tray, a screen, basically this deal right here, and this just lays in here like this. And what I did is I just went and bought some aluminum like this, the louvered aluminum, and I just cut it to size. I pressed it in there and punched the holes through. And the idea with this now is that as that crank spins and that oil is flying off there, instead of hitting the flat sheet metal and bouncing back, it's going to hit this mesh, and that's going to catch the oil, which will then seep onto the windage tray and then go back into the oil pan. This supposedly helps with the frothing of the oil, the aeration, helps minimize that. So a lot of benefits with doing this. I think I've got like probably less than $10 into this as far as the aluminum goes, and I even had to do it twice because I screwed the first one up. So not a lot of investment, just time. Really, it's just time. So anyway, this will go back on here like so, and you bolt that bugger back down like you normally would, and boom, oil control. Now the only other thing I have to do is get into the oil pan, and I'm going to have to custom make a trapdoor baffle. I bought an aftermarket kit that basically copies what BMW uses with their, they've got the vertical walls that create a box, and then there's rubber flappers that open and close as oil needs to pass through. The ones I bought, they're just too big for my sump, so I'm just going to have to create my own. You can buy the little aluminum hinge trapdoors. I'll just get a set of those, build my own, and put that in the pan. So once that is done, that will encompass our changes to the oiling system, or at least in the pan, to help get better oil control and keep things from going boom. So what else here? Since we're at it and we're talking about oil control, something you should be doing, even if you're just doing a junkyard rebuild or whatever. Here's the oil pickup tube. This guy here goes into your oil pump on the bottom, right there. Okay, and this thing, I just dropped the bolt on the floor. So you probably can't see this, but the factory pickup has one bolt hole there. Okay, that is the only thing holding this end into your oil pump, which for your daily is probably fine. And then there's an O-ring here as well. So I have already replaced this. The one that came out of here was completely flat. I mean, you couldn't tell that it was ever round in its entire life. So that is one place where these LSs tend to have oiling issues. Is what'll happen is that O-ring will flatten out, it'll dry out, it'll crack, it'll just basically stop doing its job, and oil will start passing through there and bypassing the oil pump, and your oil pressure drops. So instead of having 40, 50, 60 psi, you've got like 20 psi. And the other thing with that is to overcome the single bolt issue is a lot of companies sell these little deals which overlap that. Get you a better picture here. Okay, it's kind of like a little horseshoe deal that goes on there, and you can utilize both bolt holes that are there in the oil pump. The pump has two holes. For whatever reason, they decide to only use one from the factory. So then you can bolt that down. You get nice even clamping pressure where it bolts into the oil pump, and it helps to eliminate that problem with oil seeping through there. Another thing I did on the back side of the block here, it's actually underneath the rear cover, it's on this side here, which would be the driver's side. Yes, because it's right above where the oil filter goes. There is a barbell that goes in there. It looks like a barbell. And the factory one is plastic. It's got a rubber O-ring on the one end. And those tend to deteriorate over time, and those also stop doing their jobs, and they cause problems with oil pressure and things like that. And it also is there it's for the oil bypass. Tons of companies sell billet aluminum ones to replace those, and so I put one of those in to help alleviate that issue. You know, it's cheap insurance. I mean, between this little brace that goes on the oil pump pickup tube, and the O-ring, and the barbell, I want to say there's maybe 40 bucks there, you know, so these are just cheap insurance things to do. You know, these LS bottom ends are freaking bulletproof. There's just these little things to watch out for that can, you know, obviously cause it to blow up. So if you can spend 40 or 50 bucks to keep your, you know, 100,000 mile junkyard motor going another 100,000 miles, I mean, to me, that's worth it. So, I think that's all I got on this one. So we will touch base again here in the near future, and I'll keep you up to date with what we got going on. Thanks, guys.